and ushering of knowledge and wisdom. We now invite our esteemed dignitaries on stage to participate in the ceremonial lighting of the lamp, marking the formal inauguration of this conference. Thank you, everyone. The Kuldeep of Banaras Hindu University is the lyrical representation of Mahamana Ji's vision for the establishment of this great institution. It was penned by the leading scientist, Dr. Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, and its musical form was given by Sangeet Matan Pandit Omkar Nath Thakurji. The Kuldeep will now be presented by a team of vocalists, Aparna Pandey, Roma, Nidhi, Priya Nishad, along with the instrumental team, Vishal Tabla, Ritik Shukla और हारमोनियम. आप सबसे विनम्र निवेदन है कि कुलगीत को हम श्रद्धा के भाव से आत्मसात करते हैं, इसलिए अनुरोध है कुलगीत की प्रस्तुति के बाद तालियां बजाएं. Thank you, Kuldeep team. Now I request Dr. Felicitation Mishra ji, the head Department of Economics, Varanasi University, to welcome with floral greetings Professor K. Krishna sir.
Leading to successful, useful economics research. We are immensely grateful to our who have meaningful to us. I really thank you and also extend my hearty welcome to NAFED, other sponsors like the Bank of India, National Bank, National Stock Exchange, NCX, and NABARD, State Bank of India, Bank of Baroda, without whose meaningful cooperation it is very difficult to organize this conference. Over the next few days, we will witness thought-provoking discussions and groundbreaking research presentations by the budding young scholars and the advice and solutions of the what you can say matured brains of India, like Professor Laya, Professor Mandal, Professor Badman, Professor Mahadev, Madam Professor Dua, and many more. Extremely, I am unable to long list of names. I take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to the Indian Economic Society for its unwavering commitment to fostering the excellence in economic research and also giving us an opportunity to hold this conference. My heartfelt appreciation also goes to all my colleagues of my department, of my co-institution, the colleges. There is MMD Medam Vidyalaya who extended wholehearted support, and there are 4 important colleges admitted to the privilege of Varanasi University. I got immense support from all of them, so I welcome them all. Also, I express my thanks to all of them. My students who are real students of ours, scholars and students have all contributed a lot in this successful. If I do not speak a few words about my department, it will be half food. So I would like to speak only 2-3 sentences regarding my department. Varanasi University came into its existence by our Saint Mahamana Pandit Mohammed whom we call Mahamana, in the year 1916, which contributed a lot to the socio-economic, political, and cultural development of the country. And my Department of Economics came into existence in 1918 in the name of the Department of Political Economy. Later on, it got separated. We have a full-fledged Department of Political Science, and now we have our own Department of Economics. Further, in its growth, this Department of Economics now has 3 institutions. The department itself, there is the Faculty of Commerce, which came out of the Department of Economics, and the Institute of Management Studies at Varanasi University, which also originally came out of the Department of Economics. Mahanaji had a very good interest in the beginning of this department, so this department has its long history. We had champions in the field of economics like Dr. Nihal Singh and our first head when it was political economy. But when the department came to existence, we had Professor A.K. Dasgupta, a very prominent name. And now we have a good number of students. We are running 3 programs, UG, PG, as well as PhD. In post-graduation, we have 2 courses. One is our traditional course, General Economics, and 2017 study, we started a BRICS Network University research program, Masters in Economics. Presently, my department is going well. Thank you very much for all of you listening to me patiently. I wish you all a comfortable stay. Being the head of the department, I in advance apologize if any lapse comes to you. Please don't hesitate if you feel any difficulty. Kindly communicate to my volunteers, my students, are very good. Hope you have realized, and if you have anything, please tell them. Thank you very much. Actually, now I call one professor whom I love really, Professor Radhavin sir, ex-executive director of State Bank of India. Presently, he is the chairman of the Tax Trust to give us some ideas and advices regarding trust and tax. So, thank you.
Distinguished members of the dais, distinguished members in front of me, and friends. I stand here today particularly to felicitate two of our very distinguished past presidents and chairmen of the dais last today for the honor they have been bestowed by the Government of India by way of publicity. And these two names, as most of you may be knowing, is Professor B.R. Panchamurthy, who has played a very, very huge role in our learning at the times today, right from around 2000. And Professor L. Krishna, who needs possibly no introduction, because most of the countries, the mathematicians have been his students as part of Delhi School of Economics as a towering figure. Now, so it's really a great honor that ties have been recognized for the kind of the public service we are doing through advancing the cause of economic research and economic research and quantitative economic research. And I think these ties in the past also have produced quite a lot of luminaries. Last year we were in Agartala honoring Professor C.R. Rao, who just died at the age of 102 and plus. And this year it is such a great occasion that we have with us Professor K. Krishna. Professor Panchamurthy could not really make it for current reasons. But they are all great people. Professor Panchamurthy, as you know, is also a great scholar of Sanskrit, Chancellor of the Sanskrit University. I think they themselves are institutions by themselves. So we are very sure. So I always say on behalf of the TIES and Science class that we are very, very happy that this honor is amply deserving for your public service. Great public service.
Thank you, Burman sir, for enlightening us about two most important and towering pillars for TIES, Professor B.R. Panchamurthy sir and K.L. Krishna sir. Since K.L. Krishna sir is amongst us here with us, I request the dignitaries on the dais to felicitate him on this special occasion. where he has been awarded with Padma Shri. I request our chief guest, Shri Suman Beriji, and all the dignitaries to felicitate Professor Krishna on this special occasion of 59th Annual Conference of ICE. Thank you so much, sir. We are privileged to have with us today Sri Suman Beriji, the Honorable Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Government of India, as our chief guest. Sri Suman Beriji is a distinguished economist and policy advisor with vast experience in economic policy, formulation and research. He took over as Niti Aayog Vice Chairperson from 1st May 2022. Before his current role, he was serving as Global Fellow in the Asia Program of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. Also with Royal Dutch Shell's Global Chief Economist based in Hague, the Director General of National Council of Applied Economic Research, New Delhi, and was also associated with the World Bank in Washington, D.C. He has contributed significantly to the fields of political economy, of reform, macroeconomic policy, banking, and financial regulation. His expertise has shaped various economic reforms and strategic policies in India and beyond, and which he is doing right now in the capacity of Vice Chairperson of Niti Aayog. It's an honor to invite Shri Suman Beriji to deliver the inaugural address.
Dr. Sudipto Mandu, President of the Indian Economic Society, Professor Mrityunjay Mishra, Head of Department, Economics, Banaras Hindu University, Dr. K. Shanmugam, Secretary, the Indian Econometric Society, Dr. K. L. Krishna, revered past President and one of the leading lights of the economics profession, Dr. Deepak Nair, who will follow other friends and acquaintances from the economics community, but most of all, researchers and students who happen to be in the audience. Dr. Mandal is a close friend of mine. And also we serve together on the Statistical Commission, and I see others, including Dr. Barman, who have led their time to the Statistical Commission. I wanted to thank him for giving me the honor of delivering this inaugural address here, and to do it in the very special town of Varanasi, Kashi, call it what you will, for many reasons. Of the freedom movement to knowledge almost a century ago. Second, because I report to the officer, and this is his constituency, and that I see with my own eyes. Actually, this is my second visit here. I was here for the G20 as well. And third, because it is India's main resource is its human resources, its human capital. And those here and those who are being trained by those here represent the, if you like, the people for whom, or the generation for whom Viksit Bharat is being created. And so any opportunity that I get to interact with campuses, with students, is one that I welcome. So I do thank Dr. Mandal for his kind invitation.
Now, and let me also use the opportunity to thank staff of the Bharat Hindu University and of the state government for all that they have done to facilitate a visit by my wife and myself. Now, I have to start with a certain amount of policy, economist, now lucky to be a policy advisor. I'm not quite sure that I would call myself a policy maker, but certainly in a position to influence policy discussions and debates. But the reality is that because of a disastrous experience of being taught econometrics as an undergraduate in my philosophy, politics, and economics course, I shied away by Oli Ashenfelter, who was a pretty seminal in economics, but also in econometrics, recognizing that that under Dr. and CRL were calling that statistics, which is, if you like, the origin of econometrics, is an important Indian strength. That said, if you like, the intricacies of using econometrics for policy evaluation, I think was really brought home to me when I was EG of NCAR, and we had this partnership with the National Bureau of Economic Research at that time, led by Marty Feldstein, and this was in the first decade of this century, and Marty made it a bait for some of the leading American scholars, or leading scholars at NBR, mostly American, to come out and make brief presentations on the work that they were doing on trying to address policy issues. And I recognized, as it were, the subtlety and the sophistication of econometric design and hypothesis testing. And of course, that was also the time when the vote for randomized control trials, which is another way of doing the same kind of evaluation, got started. And I'm very honored and pleased that both Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee attended those conferences, and they were, of course, more recently honored by the Nobel Committee for their work on development economics. So I don't need persuasion, even though I don't have the capacity, of the importance of econometrics as a way of coming up with evidence-based assessment of government policies, but my own interest is on the policy side. I understand that there are 200 papers that have been selected this conference. I applaud the diligence of the society in putting out a call for papers, and those who have responded to that call for papers. Unfortunately, I don't have the full list of those who were selected, and I won't be here to stay for those technical sessions. It's entirely possible that quite a few of them are on econometric theory, but I would hope that certainly some of them would be on the application of econometrics to policy challenges facing India. Now, in thinking, you who are in the management field would know that Shell is known in the private sector for not for 50 years, for its own investment decisions, not believing in econometric models as a tool for thinking over their time horizon, which is 30 years, but preferring to think in terms of scenarios. I won't spend a lot of time on scenarios. The point I want to make, and I'll return to this, is that thinking for a 5-year horizon and thinking for a 25-year horizon, or now 22-year horizon, are qualitatively different challenges. And frankly, Niti Aayog, and no part of the Indian system actually has much experience in how to think over that long term, except possibly our defense services. So, just to say that that's an intellectual challenge, I think it also is a research challenge, because the whole point about evidence-based research and econometrics is the careful scrutiny of the past in the expectation that it will guide the future. But if the future is unknowable, the question of, as it were, careful past analysis becomes, a little bit more moot. So I just make that point and leave it there, which is that we are in somewhat uncharted territory. And I should also say that because Shell is a big presence in Singapore, the Singapore government is a government, as is actually the US government, that has used scenario techniques to help them think about the future. But on the whole, in the public sector, scenarios tend to be more in the military sphere than they are in the economic sphere. Now, so that, now let me turn to the concept of Viksit Bharat. Those of you who may have paid attention to what the Honorable Prime Minister had to say in 2022, talked about India becoming a developed society by 2047. So, becoming a developed economy actually is a way station. It's a means to an end, and that end is a developed society. That's point number one. Point number two is that while there was a great deal of political consultation at the time of the 5-year plans, Honorable Prime Minister, and again maybe linked up with the long-term horizon, longer-term horizon we're thinking about, very much sees Viksit Bharat as what he calls a Jan Andolan. This is not primarily a technocratic advice, technocratic challenge. The analogy he always draws is between the 25 years from 1922 to 1947, the entire period in which Banaras Hindu University was in existence, where from being dismissed as improbable, impractical, as a Jan Andolan, led of course by Gandhiji, India became more or less the first country, large country, Indonesia perhaps being the other, to wrest freedom from its colonial masters. And so he is very committed to the idea that what is needed is mass mobilization, particularly amongst the young, and that's where students come in, so that there should be a will towards becoming a developed society by 2047. And this is as much about motivation and about, if you like, will, energy. I think, who is it at Columbia who wrote this book, Mass Flourishing? So he's, if you like, a national movement, and not just a technocratic exercise. But having said that, let me move on to the technocratic part of it. Now, there are rightly different views on the link between growth and inclusion. But recent work that I've seen by Land Pritchett suggests that rapid growth is very highly correlated with rising living standards on most of the metrics that development economists would care about. And there is a lot of confusion, or there's a lot of diversity in how people characterize the agenda of becoming a developed economy, no longer a development society. That's the end. This is the means to the end. A developed economy by 2047. Now, the government of India, through its finance ministry, has been very clear about what that would look like in in dollars of 2047, which is $30 trillion, and per capita income of around 80,000 US dollars. The World Bank's country economic memorandum that was launched last week follows a different metric. The IMF, for its part, works with PPP. But let me just say that I think there's a reasonable consensus that what we've been doing surprisingly successfully up till now, which is 30 years average growth, per capita growth, at around 6.5%. This is also the figure in the current in the country economic memorandum, has been important and impressive, but that to reach any of the metrics of a developed economy by 2047, we would need to up that for, I think the figure in the World Bank number is to 7.8% real. Adil Panagaya had an article in the Economic, in the Times of India recently. No, this was the speech that he gave at the Accounts Day, or whatever it was called. So the point is that we need to raise our game, and we need to raise it over the next decade for reasons that now bring us into the sphere of econometrics, which is that this is the golden moment of our demographic transition. This is also when we stand to harvest the big investment that we have made in tertiary education, well, in education across the board, but particularly tertiary education. And this is when we have, as it were, low-hanging fruit in terms of the population, the employment population ratio. The male employment population ratio is more or less in line with global standards, although there are issues of the quality of employment. But there's low-hanging fruit in the female labor force participation rate. And finally, it is an observed empirical reality that as you grow richer, for many reasons, the declining productivity of factors of production, the fact that you're nearing the technological frontier, that we can call it the middle income trap, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, but the reality is that that as we become richer, the growth in impetus starts to slow down. So if in average over 22 years, we want to grow north of 7%, well, then in this decade, till about 2035, we're going to have to try and grow faster than now. So there's no time to lose. Now, I mentioned the World Bank, and I do want to point out, to make 2 points. One is that sustaining 6.5 growth, which we have already, getting to 7.5 growth, which we wish to, is not business as usual. It's not a linear extrapolation of what has worked well for you in the past. As I once heard Professor Harbaugh say at a conference at Stanford, and he's somebody who is well known in Indian circle. He said, we tend to think with the Chinas and the Koreas of the world that 8% growth is, like something that's guaranteed. It's like a swan gliding on the water and what we don't see is the fierce paddling that's going on under the water. So the point is that you can't even take 6.5% growth as automatic. Some of it is automatic because the transition of labor from agriculture to industry is not yet exhausted, and that provides a productivity boost. But ultimately, you have to depend on innovation and move to innovation-led research. And this is where I want to, in a sense, contrast 2 points of view and then indicate how we see it that have come out of the World Bank in the last year. The first is the World Development Report, which talks about the middle income trap, author, or at least under the supervision of the Chief Economist of the World Bank, an Indian and a good friend, who invented the term middle income trap in 2006, which basically argues that the countries hit the middle income trap when they are not able to move on, when they're not able to institutionalize, create infrastructure. And since we are here in the city of Shivji, let me just say that you could regard the middle income trap as one of the insights of the Asian, that there is no creation without destruction. And so the question of how reform should assist not only in creation, but also not necessarily in destruction, but in the mobility of resources, is already and will become a more important challenge for India in the next decade. The second point I make is that while we may not find, if you like, evidence-based, fact-based technologies all that helpful for a 20-year horizon, I think it's reasonable to say that thinking about 2025 to 2035 is a more manageable and a more tractable challenge. And I say this having just returned at the weekend from 2 days in Bangkok and asking researchers there whether they thought that the middle income trap was a reality, and then say, yes, we certainly find we are facing it. So linking my point about the middle income trap and where India is right now, I would argue that we have not exhausted the phase of investment-led growth. Yes, the rate of return on capital will decline, but we have complementary resources of human capital and, if you like, raw capital to complement it. So arguably, we don't yet have to worry about, as the person in Thailand said, about exhausting or going beyond the Lewis study. Oddly enough, our agriculture is thriving much more than our manufacturing. And of course, there is very cloudy but unmistakable buoyancy. We are about 2,500 per capita right now. And Thailand, this is on the World Bank Atlas methodology at market pricing and exchange rates, not PPP. Thailand is at about 7,000. And as you know from the rule of 72, at 7%, you would double the capita income in a decade, and 8% it would be 9 years, at 7% it would be 10 years. And so, really, what we're talking about is whether between 2025 and 2035, India can transform itself into the Thailand of today. And I think that's a tangible, tractable goal. So look at my, how much time do I still have? Another 5 minutes or 10 minutes? What time are we going to start? Okay, and that's meant to be your time. Okay, so a lot more to say, but I won't say it. I thought 40 minutes would be all. So the challenge now, and there's another analytic reason why the challenge of faster growth is now, which is the following. Ultimately, rising incomes are generated by increasing labor productivity, and yet we have a large possibility of increased employment. Now, what we're learning from the recent PLFS surveys is that we've been doing a reasonable job on both female employment, aggregate employment, maybe not so much on salary employment. But I don't think anybody would say that our labor supply is exhausted. Indeed, that's the whole idea of the Amrit Kaal, is that we're going to be the largest net provider of labor services in the world. But if that pool of labor is to increase labor productivity, I won't confuse the discussion by bringing in total factor productivity, although that's important as well, that it stands to reason that rising labor productivity means that the same labor force is able to, the same output can be produced by a smaller labor force. That's what's meant by rising productivity. And we want and need rising productivity for higher incomes. And so the only way to reconcile more absorption of the labor force with rising incomes and rising productivity is faster growth. So these are all the reasons why 8% growth for the next decade ought to be our national mission. So let me, in my remaining few moments, make a couple of points on research and policy. As I said, I don't consider myself to be a scholar in the sense of writing for publication, but I'm deeply committed to the idea that it is only through the process of critical examination, or peer review, that ideas receive, if you like, legitimacy. So those of you who are presenting papers here with an eye on publication, I think that that's important work, particularly if it's on policy issues. What I would say is that while NITI itself has runs a research program largely to meet its own needs, but also to some extent as a public good. NITI's primary role, I believe, is to be sufficiently well equipped so that through, if you like, events like this, we are aware of who is doing what and can act as a screen, a filter, and a transmission mechanism to the line ministries and the Prime Minister. And perhaps my final point would be this. This is my first time in government. I was at the XAR, I was a member of several commissions, including the Statistical Commission. I was a member of Dr. Rangarajan's Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council under the UPA. But nothing is quite the same as being, fortunately, at a senior position within government and seeing how government works from the inside. I think the point I want to make to you as my final point would be this, which is that we are a very diverse and lively democracy, and part of that is that the headlines are almost wholly preoccupied with, as it were, the political maneuverings of our governing class. Not all of it is always edifying or attractive. But I would say that the biggest privilege I've had in my 3 years is to help organize and then sit by the side of Honorable Prime Minister at meetings of our governing council, which includes some union ministers, but also includes the chief ministers of all of India's states and the lieutenant governors of the union territories. Even though there are states which are ruled by the opposition, and that's the way it should be, we get a pretty good turnout at the governing council. And I think my last point would be is that in my 3 governing council meetings now, I have been deeply impressed by the granular, tangible, uncynical commitment of all chief ministers to the welfare of their states and to the welfare of the country. Prime Minister Modi likes to call that Team India, and I can just reassure those of you who are younger and those who teach that Team India and Indian democracy is live and well, and that it is the challenge, duty, and excitement of trying to realize the vision of India as a developed society by 2047 that should animate our activities in all what we're privileged to do. So my thanks again to the Society for giving me this platform and for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightening address, emphasizing on growth, research, and reform, and sharing insights on the roadmap for our Viksit Bharat 2047 and leading us on the policy front. We now move forward to the next important aspect of the inaugural, which is the presidential address, which will be delivered by Dr. Mandle, President, Indian Economic Society, Chairman, Board of Governors, Center for Development Studies. Dr. Mandle is a renowned economist and policy expert who has made significant contributions to fiscal and monetary policy, development economics, macroeconomic modeling, forecasting, and governance. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at the NCAR and has been associated with prestigious institutions as such as NIBFP, served as on the committee of Hotel Finance Commission, erstwhile Monetary Policy Advisory Committee of the Reserve Bank of India, and served as chairman of the National Statistical Commission. His research has played a crucial role in shaping economic policy and discourse in India. With great honor, we invite Dr. Mande sir to deliver the presidential address.
Professor K. Krishna, our Guru, Sri Suman Berry, Vice Chairman of Inaugural, and my friend, Dr. Burman, Professor Mishra, Professor Shanmugan, students, researchers, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and my privilege to deliver this presidential address at the 59th Annual Conference of the Indian Economic Society here in Banaras Hindu University. It is one of our largest and most prestigious central universities, established by Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya in 1916 in this holy city of Varanasi, which I understand is also the oldest living city in the world. I must thank the society for giving me this opportunity. The theme I have chosen for this address is what I call the growth employment paradox. It is one of the most important challenges we are facing today in our current phase of development. I have discussed this issue earlier at the 75th Annual Conference of the Delhi School of Economics in August last year, and have continued to pursue it in collaboration with my co-researchers. I would therefore describe my address today as a progress report on our ongoing work. What do I mean by the growth employment paradox? As has often been pointed out, India remains and has been for some time the fastest growing major economy in the world. We are not growing at around 8%, which is what we need to do, as he very pointed out, if we want to reach Bharat status by 47, but we're doing pretty well by international standards. The World Economic Outlook of the International Monetary Fund indicated that among major economies, India recorded the highest growth in 2024 at 7%. China, which recorded the second highest growth among these major economies, was well behind at 4.8%. The corresponding projections for 2025 are 6.5% for India and 4.6% for China. Table 1 gives the real GDP estimates of compound annual growth rate of GDP for the period 2011 to 2012 onwards to the present, which works out to 5.9%. This has been compared in the table with the growth of labor supply, which is called labor force in labor surveys, and employment, which is called workforce in labor surveys. Between them, that is the unemployment, as estimated from the 68th round of the National Sample Survey, Employment Unemployment Survey for 2011-12, and the Periodic Labor Force Survey for 23-24. As Mr. Mohan has pointed and others have pointed out, these estimates are sensitive to the reference period of the NSS survey. Accordingly, in the table I have presented the estimates for the usual principal status, the usual principal and subsidiary status, and the current weekly status. Based on these different reference periods, the compound annual growth rate of employment for the period will be roughly in the range of 2.1% to 2.4%. Now, that is of course half the rate of the rate of growth of GDP or output. Now, this is to be expected, and in itself it is not a matter of concern. As was just mentioned, we expect productivity rising, and in the decomposition of the sources of growth, a large part of it has a growth of output is expected to come from increases in productivity. However, what is concerning is that the growth of employment has not kept pace with the growth of labor force, which has ranged from 2.2% to 2.5%, depending on which measure of that we take. And this is for the period 2011 to 23-24. As a consequence, on the reference period, depending on the reference period chosen, open unemployment rose from 12 million to 23.3 million if you take UPS, 10.4 million to over 20 million if you take UPSS, or 16.6 million to 29.1 million if you take the current weekly status. That is at a compound annual growth rate of between 4.8% to 5.6%. In other words, India's GDP growth rate is very high, as I mentioned, yet the growth rate of unemployment is also very high. This is what I have called the growth employment paradox. What accounts for this, and how can it be addressed? Before turning to these questions, let me digress briefly to discuss two what I think are very important blind spots in our unemployment data, which constrain our ability to address these questions with robust evidence. While the absolute numbers of unemployed has risen very rapidly, as I just mentioned, the unemployment rate has remained quite modest, and this is also given in table 1. It has often been remarked that in a developing country like India, with a dominant informal sector, including agriculture, accounting for the bulk of the workforce, what matters is not open unemployment, but underemployment or disguised unemployment. In the wake of Arthur Wills' seminal work on economic development with the unlimited supply of labor, this was in 1954, as most of you know, there was a great deal of interest in estimating the extent of surplus labor in India. This in the 1950s and 1960s. There has been a recent revival of interest in estimating surplus labor or underemployment here in India, and I've given some of the references in the paper. In this context, the first data blind spot relates to the way in which questions are asked and responses recorded regarding employment and unemployment in the annual periodic labor force survey. Without getting into the arcane mindset of the PLFS schedules, which I have discussed in some detail in the appendix to the talk, to the address, let me just say this. In the PLFS data, all workers are classified as either employed or unemployed. There is no provision for classifying workers as partially employed or unemployed. Thus, you will take in the current weekly status, data on all of those underemployed, even if they had, for example, just 1 hour of work for 4 days in the week, they would be classified as employed. Hence, it is not possible to provide any firm estimate of employment. Attempts to generate an estimate of underemployment from the weekly activity particulars of respondents, which is actually given in the Imperial household data, that indicates that the underemployment rate would range from as little as less than 1% or negligible of the workforce to over 20%, depending on what assumptions we make in interpreting the PLFS data, and as I said, the details are given in the appendix. Just a small adjustment in the PLFS schedule to add a code for partial employment in activities such as options would largely take care of this problem. But until this is done, the extent of underemployment among the employed workforce will remain a blind spot. The second blind spot relates to temporary or circulatory migration. My colleagues at the Institute of Human Development and I have just completed fieldwork for a resurvey of villages in remote corners of Jharkhand, which I had first surveyed way back in 1977 for a study of the bonded labor system that then prevailed in the region. 48 years is a long time. Even in this remote peripheral region, the change that has occurred during this period is breathtaking, and the bonded labor system has long gone. One of the key findings that is emerging as we process the survey data is that the change is being driven by the very high incidence of circulatory migration. And this has been made possible by the huge improvements in communication and connectivity over the decades. Other village studies in less developed regions of the country have also consistently underlined the importance of circulatory migration in driving change in these rural areas. And again, I've given a number of references to the literature. The phenomenon of circulatory migration was first systematically studied by the anthropologist Jan Breman, who continued to write because he thought it was a very important theme for many years. More recently, Professor Srivastava, now on the Faculty of Institute of Human Development, has published several papers on the same subject. However, as Professor Srivastava points out, neither the censuses nor the NSS surveys are able to capture the incidence of such short-term circulatory migration. This is despite the special surveys on migration that the NSS conducted in the 55th round, 1999, 2000, and in the 64th round, that is 2007, 2008. The reason is the way households and members of households are defined in the NSS. A household is eligible for inclusion in the ultimate stage unit in the sample frame, provided it has a stable address for at least 6 months, and individuals are eligible as inclusion has been counted in the household only if they are resident in the household for at least 6 months. Now, the temporary migrant workers are typically away from their rural household for over 6 months and therefore not recorded as members of the household at the origin. Nor are such workers recorded at the urban destination, as they are mostly footloose male workers at construction sites and other activities who are usually not resident in any fixed address for 6 months or more. Hence, the temporary migrant workers are largely invisible in the official survey data. Yet, their numbers may not be negligible. Drawing on the PLFS survey of 2017-18 and other sources, and based on a set of assumptions, if you don't actually have direct estimates, Srivastava suggested that temporary migrant workers could have been as many as 59 million in 2017-18, and that is 7 years ago. Though he makes clear that this is just an indicative broad order of magnitudes and not a robust estimate. The high incidence of temporary migrant workers, of course, became prominently evident to all of us when millions of them had to trudge home on foot during the COVID-19 crisis because neither trains, nor buses, trucks, or even cycles were scarce at that point. Now, I have drawn attention to two blind spots in the official data, which could be biasing our perception of employment and unemployment in opposite directions. One points to the possibility that the data on employment may be including large numbers of workers who are actually underemployed. The other points to the likelihood that the actual level of employment will be much larger than what is recorded. With these qualifications, let me now turn to my main theme, which is the growth employment paradox I mentioned at the outset. Why is unemployment rising so rapidly despite the high growth of GDP? Or, to put it differently, why is the demand for labor not keeping pace with the growth in labor supply? As the Economics survey pointed out last year, that's not the current survey, the survey done last year, this is mainly due to the increasing technological complexity and rising capital intensity of production. The consequent increase in labor productivity has been reflected in the declining output elasticity of employment. Table 2 presents the data on trends in capital intensity using the claims data from Clem's data from Reserve Bank of India indicates that during the period 1990-2000 to 2023-24, the stock of capital in real terms relative to the total number of workers increased by over 200%. In real terms, that is less than 28 per thousand workers to nearly 90 at 2011-12 prices. Why has capital intensity been rising so steadily? A straightforward neoclassical response would be to say that the labor market is not gearing because the wage rental ratio, the price of labor relative to the cost of capital, is too high or rising. Indeed, it is often been said that for a developing country with scarcity of capital, the cost of capital in India is too low. So what is the evidence? Table 3 in my address that's given there presents data on yields of government bonds and corporate bonds of varying maturities and return on equity for the period 2001 to 2023-24. The average yield on the benchmark 10-year government security was 7.3%, while that on the 91-day Treasury bill was slightly lower at 6.37%. The yield curve on corporate bonds, private sector, was almost flat, ranging from 7.75 to 8.25%, which reflecting the slightly higher risk of corporate bonds compared to sovereign bonds. With an average headline inflation rate of 5.85% during this period, the real cost of capital for the private sector works out to just 1.3 to 1.4%. The mean return on equity, taking the Nifty 50 as an index, was much higher at 15.73%, which works out to 2.7% in real terms. But this is risk capital, as reflected by a much higher standard deviation of 31.3 compared to only 1 to 2 for sovereign or corporate bonds, which is again given in that same table. Hence, the risk-adjusted return is probably not much higher than that low cost for corporate bonds, which I mentioned. As against this, now looking at the wage part of the wage rental ratio, wage rates rose by 3.8% per year for casual labor during the period 2011 to 23-24, but only 1.1% for regular workers. Thus, there is no unambiguous evidence of a secular rise in the wage rental ratio. More to the point, or more important, Schumpeter pointed out a long time ago that in the capitalist system, technical change is not driven by competition for market share through relative, marginal adjustment relative prices at the margin. It is driven instead by the struggle among firms for their very survival, the perennial gale of creative destruction, as he called it. In fact, the relentless rise in capital intensity is not limited to the capital system alone. Acemoglu and Johnson have demonstrated in their recent 1,000-year history of technical change, remarkable piece of work. If you haven't seen it, I would commend it to everyone. What they show is that throughout history, technical change has been driven by controlling elites who have attempted to capture for themselves the enormous gains in wealth that the new technology generated, while marginalizing the role and share of labor. What is new in the current post-industrial technology revolution, which they also write about, is that instead of reducing the role of just physical labor by blue-collar workers, artificial intelligence is now being deployed to also reduce the role of mental labor by white-collar workers. So rising capital intensity and the declining output elasticity of employment, therefore the norm. The question for us here in India is how can growth be made more employment intensive in this challenging context? In my Delhi School of Economics central anniversary address, which I referred to earlier, I have demonstrated that while capital intensity might be rising across the board, there is a large variation in capital intensity, or the employment elasticity, across sectors. Policies that nudge profitability in favor of sectors that are the most employment intensive can therefore make growth significantly more employment intensive. Agriculture is the most labor intensive sector in the economy, accounting 46% of the workforce, but only 16% of the GDP, and therefore characterized by very low productivity. Hence, I had suggested that the policy goal here should be to draw workers out of agriculture into non-agricultural sectors that are the most labor intensive and which also account for a large share of the workforce, indicating that there is actually a large demand for the products for these products, digital or services. In a recent paper, Varanasi and Sabu have taken this argument forward, showing that in just 7 of these employment-intensive non-agricultural sectors, they account for over 2/3 of total non-agricultural employment. These sectors include construction, trade, land transport, education and research, wearing apparel manufacture, hotels and restaurants, and other services. In these sectors, for every additional ₹1 crore of output, they would on average directly generate 19 additional jobs, and a total of 24 additional jobs would take direct and indirect employment. Underlying this average picture, there are large variations even within the group of 7, leaving aside the omnibus group of other services which I mentioned. Manufacturing of wearing apparel, for instance, generates as many as 68 direct and indirect jobs for 1 crore output. Hotels and restaurants generate 30 direct and indirect jobs. Trade generates over 20 additional jobs, and so on. Moreover, and this is very important, the skill requirement of jobs in all these very labor-intensive sectors, except education and research, would actually be very modest, which matches the skill profile of the bulk of India's labor force today. Now, given the urgency of generating jobs, industrial policy should target these sectors, some of which are also export-oriented and earn foreign exchange. Having mentioned the phrase industrial policy, I should add that the concept is now once again respectable ever since the demise of the Washington Consensus. Indeed, notwithstanding summons to the developing countries seeking aid, industrial policy has never been off the table. It has always been an important feature of economic policy, especially in the advanced countries, which were not constrained by any dependence on multilateral aid agencies. In our own context, the present production-linked incentive policy, or PLI as it is called, has gained a lot of traction in recent years. In a budget last year, the finance minister also introduced the concept of an employment-linked incentive scheme to increase employment. However, most of the latter, the ELI, were really to provide top-ups for salary and subsidy apprenticeships in the organized sector for relatively better skilled youth. It may not make a big difference to the millions of low-skilled, unemployed or unemployed youth. Instead of a separate ELI for them, all we need to do is for the existing PLI scheme, which is linked to increasing production, to be now extended to the employment-intensive sectors instead of limiting it to only the high technology or export-oriented sectors as of present. It can be pointed out correctly that these low-skilled jobs in the employment-intensive sectors will be poorly paid jobs. However, the skill profile of a massive workforce like ours cannot be changed overnight. In the immediate future, it is these low-skilled, low-paid jobs which will enable millions of unemployed or underemployed workers to make a living, however modest. Meanwhile, a massive education skilling program can be launched with, and this is again very important, with a central role of the employer themselves to gradually change the skill profile of the Indian workforce of the future. It is absolutely essential in my view that it is the employer who know where the gaps are, where the skills need are required, who should be the central players in this youth skilling program. Because we have a lot of skilling programs we had for a long time, but I don't think the private sector entrepreneurs play the central role in these programs that I think they should be playing. So to illustrate, large corporates in the hotel industry, for instance, can be subsidized to run large-scale training programs not for charity, but as a profit-making line of business, leveraging on their core business. Finally, even if the transfer of the agricultural workforce to the identified employment-intensive sectors outside agriculture, that can also happen only gradually over the years. Moreover, as Goldar and Agarwal have pointed out in a recent paper, low productivity workers from the agricultural sector are likely to transfer initially to similarly low productivity jobs in the informal, mostly rural, non-agricultural sector.
Conundrum which India is facing at this important development at this moment. Ahead, now I request the global team, the head of the department, Dr. Mishra, to felicitate with a token of gratitude to our chief guest, Sri Suman Beriji.